So let me outline the presentation by giving certain propositions and then the geopolitical frames of the South China Sea. What are the issues of stability and convergence? What are India's interests and stakes? And my final comments there. If you look at the South China Sea, basically, we find it's a critical maritime theater that links between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And in the age of what is called the Indo-Pacific, it is the geopolitical frame that basically looks into extensive offshore mineral resources, intensive trade routes that link between the two oceans there. In the age of contemporary geopolitics, this is inevitably premised on territorial disputes, sovereignty contestations, dispute over sea-based resources, and that is spiraling into a military conflict there. And South China Sea is a potential site to resurrect ancient rivalries and contentions superimposing on fragile interstate diplomacy there. The security contestations in the region, they are running in counter to what is called the spirit of cooperative economic relations between the ASEAN states and China and other extra-regional powers. And therefore, what is essential here is the essence of cooperative security, because that would be the most optimal approach to the contentious issues there. Let me give you 4 points that will basically look into this issue. One is that the instability leading to inadvertent conflict spirals would lead to the prevalent tensions actually there. Therefore, the prospect of an accidental war is also high when it comes to this region there. Secondly, there is an escalating arms race, both naval arms race and air arms race modernization, that could fuel what is called as conflict escalation. And thirdly, the most importantly, we'll find the possible collapse of deterrence that can result in crisis escalation. And a shooting war could basically lead to undermining of regional stability, and the instability is fueling conflict there. Now, I'm not going to go into these frames because of brevity of time, but I'll just like to flag certain points that the geopolitics of the South China Sea can be looked into 3 constructs. One, it is from the construct of territory, nationalism, and sovereignty concerns. 2, it can be looked into from a point of power transition and dilemmas of security. And thirdly, how economic interdependence and strategic competition work together actually there. Now, when you look at the sovereignty concerns, let me just put 2 questions here. What is the extent and scope of commercially recoverable resources in the South China Sea that is warranting towards this conflict there? Now, there are various estimates with regard to what is called the hydrocarbon resources in the region there. And therefore, is the conflict is going to be the main source by which you could solve the problem there? Secondly, you have what is called the problem of sovereignty concerns, both from the Chinese side as well as the ASEAN states there. And therefore, sovereignty contestations cannot be looked into primarily from a competitive aspect, but they have to be looked from a diplomatic aspect there. And therefore, these sovereignty constructs are basically the derivative of historical and colonial factors that have shaped what is called as national identities there. Secondly, we find that the South China Sea basically has become what is called as an emotive issue for the Chinese, because they think that the recovery of South China Sea as a part of their territory is going to solve the long problem actually there. This is actually what we could call the manifestation of Chinese behavior in an age in which China is rising with its claim of what is called as peaceful rise. We find that the Chinese claim over South China Sea directly contradicts into what they're basically doing in terms of their global diplomacy there. Secondly, let me look into the power transition factors there. Now, the power transition factor has been long debated within international relations and strategic studies circles there. And that transition is basically that China is rising while the United States is experiencing what is called as a relative decline actually there. Now, one of the most recent initiatives of the Chinese, what is called as the One Belt, One Road initiative, basically has taken the peaceful transition of China into what is called as a trans-Asian and trans-European diplomacy, whereas the United States is actually militarily pivoting into Asia there, whereas Asia is economically pivoting towards what we could call as Europe there. Europe and Asia there. Now, in the context of this diplomatic as well as strategic shifts there, power transition is an important factor that is actually guiding the 2 states into what is called as the conflict between the 2 hegemons actually there. Therefore, South China Sea basically has a propensity of the rising powers between what is called as a dissatisfied power and what is called as a status quo power actually there. China, although it has been a although claims to have a peaceful rise, still happens to be a dissatisfied power, and therefore its accents towards military competition is becoming more important, even as it has other economic initiatives like the One Belt, One Road initiative there. Thirdly, what we could see here is economic interdependence and strategic competition. China has extensively invested into the ASEAN states. It has been investing into what is called as the Asian states and also into Europe and the United States there. As Professor Baladas Ghoshal today pointed out, that the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank is China's new signature bank that basically is looking in terms of what is called as global investment. While this global investment is going on one side, the increase of military expenditure on the Chinese side, I think in the recent Chinese defense expenditure has been increased by nearly about 10% of their average, and that basically looks into what is called the possibility of economic conflict there. Therefore, economic growth and military conflict seem to be the twin edges by which China seems to be managing its own global rise there. And the South China Sea is basically a theater for multilateral competitive regional rivalry, which has got transnational regional implications, wherein contestations of sovereignty, resources competition, implications for sea lane security, and patterns of maritime access has all been complicated and intertwined with each other actually there. And to counter this, does the region need a kind of a collective security organization, or what we could call as an Asian NATO there? Because that alone could basically offer what is called the deterrence for what is called as the China's assertive behavior actually there. Let us look into what is called the issues of stability and convergence there. Now, if you look at the issues of stability and convergence, there is the first important need is for the imperative to emphasize on the stabilization of the South China Sea there. And that is due to the critical economic dependence and exploitation of natural resources in the region there. The use of force as a means to resolve the resources issue is going to be perilous, because force is not going to yield its own returns there. Also, there is what is called as an absence of a viable approach to solve the intractable conflict, and therefore, in the absence of diplomacy, conflict becomes imperative there. Deterrence is critical, because without deterrence, you will not be able to have any kind of stabilization role, and therefore the importance of maritime confidence building measures, maritime risk reduction measures is very much important in the region actually there. And most importantly, China and the states should ensure what is called the freedom of navigation, and also could go in for what is called as joint maritime scientific research at regional and international fora there. At the most, what is important today is the implementation of a declaration of code of conduct, because the code of conduct alone can be an important measure to stabilize the region there. On the ASEAN side, there is an importance to increase the working of the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting plus, because that is an important forum for the consolidation of dialogue with China as well as the other extra-regional powers which are there in the region actually there. And the imperative for conflict avoidance is essential, because what is essentially needed is transparency in the levels of military modernization. The importance is to focus on and emphasize on INCLOS and the institutionalization of the ASEAN's Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and they are the pivotal instruments for what is called China-Southeast Asia normalization and stabilization, and the other external powers there. And there is an important issue is to have the sovereignty question frozen until viable joint development measures are proposed and implemented. And this could reduce the contentious issues of nationalism there. And China's unreasonable assertiveness of the 9-dot map is under which China claims what is called as jurisdiction is highly destabilization, and therefore that works in terms of any kind of stabilization of the region there. Let me look into India's stakes as an Indo-Pacific power in the South China Sea there. There are 5 perspectives in this aspect there. India is an extra-regional power, and it has vital commercial and economic interests, and the countries of the South China Sea, and therefore India has what is called as trade and transit routes through the South China Sea to its economic and commercial interests in the Russian Far East, Sakhalin, as well as the Pacific Rim countries. Therefore, for India, South China Sea is a maritime route of trade and transit that China cannot obstruct there. Secondly, India is an extra-regional power, And therefore, under the laws of the international maritime law, it has what is called the guaranteed provision of what is called as free trade and transit there. Therefore, the imperative is to have a common understanding and common format of accepting the norms of peaceful and stable conduct at stake that regional and extra-regional states should work out. Thirdly, India's maritime engagements in the regions have always been non-offensive, and they have nurtured cooperative and peaceful engagements. The imperative, therefore, is for cooperative maritime security ties with regional states and among the extra-regional states, where the Pacific understanding is very vital there. Fourthly, India's engagement in the South China Sea comes in terms of building operational safety of maritime capacities and platforms in the regional states, building operational safety aids, navigational safety, and also provides for smooth maritime trade in the region there. And regional and bilateral and multilateral maritime dialogues will go a long way to provide what is called the building of maritime confidence building as well as maritime stability in the region there. India's position as an extra-regional state has vital economic and commercial lifelines in the region, and that can come through the promotion of dialogues through operational and navigational safety there. India's economic and commercial engagement with Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and the Far East provides important lessons of how vital economic interests could be forged to achieve growth and prosperity in the face of varied political and security interests there. Looking into the context of India's interest is not only contemporary but also ancient there. And what has happened in recent times that China has been, with its assertive maritime and strategic modernization, has been trying to box India within South Asia there. Yet India has a credible economic presence in Russian Far East in Sakhalin and also its geoenergy investments there. Trade between India and the Indo-Pacific region is a whopping 55% of India's total trade there. India's naval engagements have increased since 2001 with Southeast Asia and in the South China Sea, with South Korea, with Japan, with Russia and the United States in the East Pacific. It has been anchoring on Singapore, Vietnam, Philippines in the Southeast Asia, with Japan, South Korea, Russia in the Northeast there. India's position in the region is one of economic engagement and security cooperation. Its engagement with ARF, with East Asia Summit, and with the various bilateral engagements shapes India's role there. India has an expanding economic footprint in Northeast Asia, attributing 19.25% of its total exports and 13.75% of its total trade slice. India's continued interest will dictate the evolution of a long-term policy. A rising China with its impressive offensive military power and continued robustness of its economy is sharply evident in the face of a relative decline and reluctance of what is called as United States and Japan that has been recently imperiled by their own economic crisis there. India's role as an important stakeholder comes as a quiet and solid way because it combines the synergies of a democratic state with benign interests that are non-intrusive to sovereignty and identity-sensitive Southeast Asia. India's interest would be augmenting a robust economic role that would be increasingly an alternate pole to China. India offers a vital strategic geopolitical balance that would be increasingly crucial in the region, even as the turbulence of the regional disputes in the South China Sea can be expected to go into uncharted pathways. And finally, contending geopolitical positions on the South China Sea shows that the stakes of the escalating conflict harms the interests of China and the littoral countries of the region, since economic interdependence is jeopardized. Therefore, there is an espousal of peaceful conflict resolving approach that is essential for a security order that will be based upon multiple security pathways, steering either from an offensive realist or a power transition theory-oriented conflict. What is needed here for the regional powers and the extra-regional powers is enmeshment of China and in the region, because these regional states could stabilize the region with the help to ameliorate tensions there. Enhancing cooperation to transform South China Sea from a sea of contention to a sea of tranquility, and stability could come from the overlapping of bilateral, multilateral, and networked arrangements. A series of arrangements would increase the value and levels of cooperation among the stakeholders, regional states, and extra-regional actors. Relying on the establishment of pan-regional agencies that monitor security situation, fostering economic cooperation, building maritime confidence builder measures would alone constitute the long-term basis of building stability in the region there. Thank you for the opportunity.